All right, Randell Trammell. And I'm interviewing you about your candidacy for state school superintendent.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me first a little bit about yourself and let people get to know you a little bit.
Sure. Well. First off, thanks for coming today. So happy to talk to you. I grew up in Dalton, just up the road, up 75. My grandmother raised me, single parent home, and we were poor. I didn't realize it, but we were poor. She worked in the carpet mill, and because of that, shift work, so she had to be at work at 7, and she was often there until 4:30 or 5. So I was always the first kid at school. Usually she dropped me off about 6:30, and the janitors would open the door for me. And then I was in the after school program, so I loved school. I mean, it was like my second home. And so just had a really good experience there. Went to Reinhardt College, now Reinhardt University over in Waleska, just over in Cherokee County. Did an undergraduate degree there. Then went back and got my master's of business administration there. And then, of course, some years later, went back to Northeastern University up in Boston and got my doctorate in education. And so I've lived here in Bartow County for going on 10 years. 10 years in May. And my wife and I live here. She's a teacher for the Bartow County school system. She's at Cloverleaf Elementary School, and she's a special ed teacher there. And our 3 children, so I've got 3 children. I've got Emery Claire, who's 5 in kindergarten. I've got Lincoln, who's 8, who's in 3rd grade, and Georgia Caroline, who is 10 and is in 4th grade. So, any, mini, money, and no mo. So we live here. We go to church at Sam Jones Methodist, and Catherine and I were looking to move back to this area. We lived down in McDonough previously, and I knew I wanted to be on the northern end of Atlanta. So we looked at Cumming, we looked at Canton, and we looked at Cartersville, and Cartersville was home, and I love it here. So that's me. I run a nonprofit that's the U.S. Center for Civic Engagement, and we do civic education. So you can probably look around my office and see that I'm a civic nerd. We work in middle schools and high schools primarily, teaching students how government works, so model legislature, and then we're also preparing students for careers in public service. So we have a program that works with students that want to be firefighters, police officers, 911 dispatchers, JROTC, all aspects of it. I like to say we are the pipeline to public service. And so, that's a little bit about me. I don't know if you have any specific questions.
Well, we'll go on to the next question. Why did you decide to run for state school superintendent? That's it's a hefty job, a state over the entire state, and I don't know how well known your name was before you started running. So why that job?
Yeah, so for me, it's real simple. I'm running for my 3 kids. I have, the Emery, Claire, Lincoln, and Georgia. We are, and this was a shocking fact when I found it out, Georgia is number 38 in the nation for education. Number 38. And when I heard that, I was like, no, that can't be right. And then I got to reading about Mississippi. They were number 49 at the bottom of the barrel. They're in the top 10 now, all right? So we've always, when we were talking about education, well, at least we're not as bad as Mississippi, or at least we're not as bad as Alabama. But the truth is, Mississippi's, as the old timers say, they've done outstripped us. And Alabama, I read an article last week that Alabama is now making fun of Georgia education. So our incumbent's a nice guy. I voted for him 3 times. But in 12 years, our reading scores have dropped 8 points. Our math scores have dropped 10 points, and we're now 38 in the nation for education. And so I've run a statewide organization, now a national organization. I've been working in schools for many, many years. Have great folks all over the state. And so I called Governor Kemp, and I was like, Governor, I'm thinking about running for state school superintendent. But if you have another candidate that you've got in mind or that you would support, let me know and I'll stay out of it. And the governor said to me, well, Randall, I've known you for years. I think you'd do a good job. I think you'd be a fine superintendent, so I think you ought to go for it. So that's kind of what kind of lit the interest. Then I had to talk to my wife. Now, that was a harder sell because she was like, well, are you sure? She's like, no, I don't want to be in public light. And I'm like, okay, well, do you know who our current state school superintendent is? Of course she did, because she's a teacher. I said, okay, now here's the trick question. Do you know his wife's name? And she said no. I said, well, I think you're safe. But nonetheless, there is added scrutiny now on my family and certainly on her and the kids. In fact, we've got the car magnets on the car, so when we're driving through town or parked in a parking lot, she'll be like, all right, kids, now remember your daddy's name's on the side of this car. So, but we prayed about it, and we both feel like this is an opportunity for us to make an impact, and so that's how we landed on it. I have a lot of experience in education. I've been in civic education for 23 years. I run a national organization. The governor had appointed me already as chair of the Commission for Civics Education for Georgia. We already work closely with the Department of Education. So all of these things, plus my relationships with the legislature, really led to me having a unique resume that would allow me to come in. I'm familiar with the Department of Education, but would come in and allow me to quickly do an assessment of what we need to do. I know the players in the other state departments and in the legislature, so we can help shift policy in that direction as well. So I really felt like it was a good time to jump in. The incumbent had been there for 12 years, and I just felt like it was time. There's, when I'm talking to crowds, and I'm usually have, this is a slow day, but normally I have 3 to 5 public speaking events a day all over the state. Yesterday morning I started out in Savannah. Last night I was at a debate in Atlanta. I always get the crowd to follow me. I work with young people, so I got to get them jazzed up. But I always will say status quo, and then the crowd will say has got to go. And that's what I'm running against status quo. And not hopefully, but we will make sure that Georgia gets out of the bottom of education and be the leader that we can be and we should be. We have been the leader in the nation, #1 state to do business in for 12 years. But if you don't have the #1 state to do education in, eventually those students grow up and they are the business leaders. So we've got to sow the seeds now to continue that prosperity.
Now, you mentioned Mississippi and Alabama. Yeah. Mississippi, of course, that's made headlines
national, yeah.
When they actually went from the bottom to #1 in literacy.
That's right.
And then number 10, as you said, across the nation. So do you see implementing some of what they did in Georgia
Yes.
to improve Georgia's numbers?
Well, and what's interesting, and thank you for bringing that up. So the Mississippi Miracle is all the rage right now in education. And to boil it down, because it's like, well, what is this? It's truly nothing miraculous. It's going back to teaching phonics. And it's teaching kids how to look at words, sound them out. It's putting in the correct supports and intervention, so that if a student is struggling, then there's a coach there, a literacy coach in by 3rd grade, so that they are getting that one-on-one instruction. And Georgia should have been leading the way with that. Mississippi's been doing this over the past 10 years, and we've been watching it. And nothing happened. So last year, Representative Bethany Ballard out of Houston County, Georgia, down in Warner Robins, introduced the Georgia Early Literacy Act. And that it mandated that we teach the science of reading, which also includes phonics. And so it made it the law of the land. And then this year they came in, Speaker Burns made it a priority, and he added to that funding for literacy coaches in every school, every elementary school, K-3 in Georgia, because you need that one-on-one thing. And why is that so important, that a kid read by 3rd grade? Well, it's important because we know statistics and research tells us that 3rd grade reading level sets up a student's success. So up until 3rd grade, you're learning to read. 4th grade and beyond, you're reading to learn. And education becomes personal. But not only that, we take that third grade reading level, and that helps us determine the number of prison beds we need in the future. If you were to go to Bartow County Jail or any of the Georgia prisons, or even look at our parolees in Georgia right now, or anywhere around the nation, you would find that some 80 to 85% of those that are incarcerated cannot read on grade level or cannot read well at all. Reading is a fundamental success ingredient that you must have. I would say reading is a right. And so we've got to take it seriously. We've got to invest in it. I'm glad that the legislature jumped in and took leadership of that. But my criticism is that that's an educational policy, and we didn't necessarily need the legislature to get in on that. We could have made that decision as a State Department of Education, but we didn't have leadership to make it happen. So the Mississippi Miracle, we're going to call it the Georgia Revival. And we're going to teach our kids to read. We're going to teach our kids to write. We're going to teach our kids how to do math. I don't know, when's the last time you went through a drive-through? And I'm notorious about this. I have a little change cup in my cup holder. And so if, go to Burger King and I get my tea when I'm on the road, and it's, let's say it's $3.11. And I'll give them $5.25. I can't tell you how many times they don't know what to do. And sometimes I actually make more money on the transaction than I spent. So I want to make sure that our students are prepared for life.
Now, along with that, I know a lot of Zoomers and a little bit younger, and they, bless their hearts, sometimes they just don't know things. Like I told you the story earlier about a teenager, 17-year-old. She doesn't know how to sign her name.
Right.
They can't do simple math.
Right.
They do not know how to approach someone and speak to them in a professional way.
Right.
They don't know the preamble to the Constitution, or even that's there. They don't know their basic rights according to the U.S. Constitution. They don't know many things that most of us grew up with, where it was almost automatic and expected to know by first or second grade. How will you address that, both for the kids that are in school, but the ones I'm calling the lost generation that are graduating now that did not learn all of those things?
Yeah.
How are we going to deal with all that?
So, I believe it was Desmond Tutu. There's an African proverb that says, instead of pulling people out of the river, go upstream and find out where they're falling in and build a bridge. So we've got to pull out and pan out and say, okay, why are we having these results? So part of it we've identified with literacy and the literacy crisis that we have here in Georgia. And by the way, along those lines, what Mississippi found was when their reading scores went up, their math scores went up, social studies, science, because literacy is the foundation. So getting back to the question, though, about those key life things that students should know, right now in the state of Georgia, there's a high school graduation requirement for a half credit of civics. You have to have 16 credits to graduate throughout your 4 years. And a half credit equals 9 weeks. It's a half a semester. So we require 1/2 credit, so 9 weeks of American government or civics to graduate high school. Now, there's a whole lot to learn about how America works and how Georgia works, and 9 weeks is not enough. I am in favor of making that a full graduation credit. So that would mean that they'd have to have a whole semester of it. Same thing with personal finance and economics, because what they typically do now is they pair government and economics together to make one semester. I think they should be standalone courses, because just as you can't learn about government in 9 weeks to be a fully functioning citizen, at the same time on the personal finance side, I think our students should graduate knowing how to balance a checkbook, how to do their taxes. I mean, earlier this week was income tax day on April 15th. I think our kids should be prepared for life. And I would even go a little step further than that. I'm a big fan of career tech. And back when I was in middle school ages ago, we had home ec. So the other day, and it's so funny that this happened. I was walking somewhere, and my shirt, I had a button-up collar shirt on, and somehow my shirt got caught on something, and it shot a button across the room. And so I was like, oh my goodness, I'm at this event, and I need to not be without a button. So I had home ec in middle school, and so I knew that there was extra buttons on the bottom of the of my shirt, and it just so happens that I keep a sewing kit in my car, and so I was able to stitch it right back up, and no problem. Earlier in the year, I had a flat, had to change my tire. Those are things that our kids should be equipped and ready to do when they graduate high school. I like to put it like this: I have 4 E's. That I have as expectations for when students graduate high school. Number 1, they should be ready to be employed. Number 2, or they should be ready to be enrolled in technical college or in university. Number 3, they should be ready to be enlisted into the armed services. Or number 4, and it's so much easier this day, to become an entrepreneur. I want to make sure that every one of our high school graduates in the state of Georgia have a path to success. So that when they graduate on Friday or Saturday, when they wake up on Monday morning, they have a plan and they know what they're going to do.
Well, let me ask you this, because a lot has been said about teachers in the classroom pitting students against their parents, against parental values. And we all know what those issues are: political, transgender, other issues. How would you put a stop to that, where parents know they have the ultimate decision over their child?
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you raised that up, because here's the deal. I'm a parent choice candidate, and I'll get into a little bit deeper of what that means. But when I mean parent choice, is parents are they have a seat at the table, and I often say we do not co-parent with the government. I'm a man of faith, and I believe that God has blessed my wife and I with our 3 beautiful and handful children. I mean, they're typical kids. But I believe, as a part of my faith, that I will be held accountable for how I raise them and steward that blessing. I believe that every parent deserves and legally has the right to have an input on their child's education. Right now, Georgia is an opt-out state, meaning that if we're going to be covering some sort of controversial curriculum, could be sex ed, it could be anything, you just name it. You have a right as a parent to opt your child out of that course for alternative lessons or etc. My thought is that Georgia should be an opt-in state, that parents should know what the curriculum is, and they should have full access to see not only the standards that are being taught that are set by the state, but also the curriculum, the textbooks, all of that sort of stuff. I believe in full transparency. Our parents need to know what our kids are learning. And I believe that our parents should be able to say, no, not my kid. No, we're not learning that. And so I support parents' rights. Now, another element of parent choice, and by the way, that goes along with vaccinations. I support a parent's right to determine what is good for their child. Number 2, I believe in parent choice in terms of educational choice. Not every school is good for every child. And right now we have a system, and I'm probably going to make some folks nervous about this, and that's okay. Not every school is good for every child. I believe in educational choice. And I believe that as a parent, if I want my child to go to a private school or homeschool or charter school or the school at the end of my street, that's my right as a parent. Our Constitution in the state of Georgia requires that our students are provided a free and appropriate public education. And so I believe, and I'm a supporter of the Opportunity Scholarship, that a student can take their funds, $6,500 is what the legislature has set, and they can apply that to wherever they would like to send their child to school. Now, let's be honest. If you want to send your child to North Cobb Christian School, $6,500 may pay for a semester. So it's it's a down payment. It's part of it. But now I do want to be very clear, and I'm always this clear with everyone I speak. Um, my wife is a public school teacher. My kids are in public school. I grew up in public school. I put my money where my mouth is, and my goal is that every single school in the state of Georgia is so excellent that it is the choice. But the truth is, right now, we have so many schools across this state that are failing. And you only get one shot at K-12 education. And I don't want our kids to be stuck in a failing school. So I want them to make sure that during their time in K-12 education that they get the very best. I want that for my kids. I want that for your kids, for our neighbors and grandkids, nieces and nephews. Right now, our kids are getting the very best education that's available to them at Cloverleaf Elementary School.
Now, you brought up a point that can be somewhat controversial because there are some people that say, and this is their argument against charter schools and the money follows the student and all that, is that if that happens, that inner city schools with a heavy minority population will go dead. And we do know that some parents that want a better education pull their kids out of those somewhat dangerous, maybe not so good failing schools and put them in a charter school or a Christian school or some other school. And there's always been a debate about schools in heavily minority areas not getting the support and the financial support and the curriculum support that schools in suburbs get. And we know that's a racial disparity argument that goes on there. So how would you ensure and tell those who are Black or Hispanic or Asian in the state that their schools in their neighborhoods are going to be just as excellent as, say, the schools in Alpharetta or Cartersville or anywhere else?
Sure. Well, first off, what I would say is let's look at how schools are funded. Okay, there's three primary sources of revenue for a school. You've got the federal government that sends in about, depends on the school, 10 to 12%. Okay, and those are mostly funds for special education and career tech. Those are federally funded programs. Then the state of Georgia has something called the Quality Basic Education, QBE formula. And it says that per student, you get a certain amount of money. And if they're special ed identified, then they'll have a little bit more. College or career tech, there's a little bit more money. But it's a formula. And let me say, by the way, that formula is very outdated. It was last revised in 1984.
I remember it was implemented.
Yeah, I mean, most of our teachers probably weren't. I mean, I don't, but anyway, it needs to be revised. But so 10%, 10 to 12% from federal, about 43% of your school system money comes from state. So that's 50. Let's just say for easy math, 55%. Where does the other 45% come from? It comes from your local property taxes. And so that's one of the challenges here in our state. And listen, I live here in Bartow County. Our property taxes have gone up crazy. My personal mortgage went up $300 a month this year just for property taxes. I don't like that any more than anybody else. But the challenge is that when you look at those property taxes, that funds your government services, and it funds that 45% of the schools. Now, do we need to make sure that our schools and our government services are being good stewards of that funding? Absolutely. And they should be held accountable. I think that there should be transparency in all the budgets so that you can see that as a citizen and provide input. So understand that first. And with the voucher, is what a lot of people call it, it only takes that state portion away for that student. So that's $6,500. So that local funding would instead of taking it with the student, it then remains there. And then instead of saying, for easy math, $5,000 for every student, well, you've lost 10 students, so now that's $5,200 for every student. So it's sort of a misnomer. Now, I want to also say that, a lot of people say, well, Atlanta Public Schools, they don't have the resources they need or anything. I'm going to push back on that. Atlanta Public Schools and other school systems, but Atlanta Public Schools in particular, have state funding, federal funding, and they also have their local school system funding. But that not only that, they have millions and millions and millions of dollars of private money coming in to support them, foundations coming in. Their cost per student to educate a kid is somewhere around $35,000. Bartow County's not anywhere near that, neither is Cartersville City Schools. So money's not the answer. You can throw money at a problem and it's not the answer. So what creates good schools? The biggest indicator of good schools, and it doesn't matter if you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, doesn't matter, is parental involvement. If the parents are involved in the school, in the child's life, then they're going to be a more successful school. But besides that, I would say that making sure that those schools, if a parent opts to take their child to another school, to me, and you can see this in Utah, you can see this in other states. Florida is probably the largest example. It creates competition, and I believe, I'm a free market person. I believe that if I go to Home Depot and I'm needing a lawnmower and they've got one and it's $500 more than the one at Lowe's, well, where are you going to spend your money at? You're going to go to Lowe's, right? So it creates some honesty between the two organizations, so Lowe's and Home Depot in this case, or the charter school and the private school and the public school. It does not have to be either or. It can be yes and quite frankly, if you look at statistics across the nation, 80 to 90% of the students are still going to choose to go to their local public school. It's just the way it is. It's the way it is in Florida right now. So you're not talking about a huge shift. Everybody's leaving all of a sudden.
Let's talk about school safety.
Yes.
Everybody's always wanting to know about school safety, obviously because of the shootings that have occurred.
Yeah.
And also because in school, a form of school safety, of personal safety, we hear of teachers doing illicit things with students, particularly in their early years in high school, but other times too. So how would you work to improve school safety where when a parent sends their child off to school, they know that school personnel and all teachers are going to do the best thing? Also, bullying is part of that. Yeah. Of parents have complained, they report bullying, school systems don't do anything. So how would you help a parent gain confidence in school safety?
That's a great question. And here's the deal. I'm a parent myself, and every morning when I send my kids to school, I am sending my most valuable asset to that school, and I'm putting it in the hands of the teachers, the principal, the other school staff there, and I'm trusting that at the end of the day, my child comes home and is whole, is safe, is without injury, and has not been otherwise harmed. That is a fair and reasonable expectation that any and every parent should have of their school and their child. So let's talk about school safety. I want to divide up your question in two parts. So you've got the external threats that you're protecting from, and then you've got the internal threats that you're protecting from. And unfortunately, the Appalachia High School shooting is still fresh in our mind. Happened last school year. The legislature was quick to act and bring in additional requirements and safety measures and protocols for school systems to implement. One of them is as simple as the badge that the teacher wears, that they can push the button and it will alert that there needs to be help in the classroom. I think if they push it 9 times or whatever, it will implement a full lockdown on the school and will notify everyone. The legislature, and Governor Kemp has not signed this into law yet, but the legislature passed a bill this year, this legislative session, that would require weapons detection system at every entrance to a school, or every main entrance. Now, for an elementary school, that's pretty easy because you have basically 2 main entrances. You've got the bus entrance and you've got the front entrance. But I think at schools like Cartersville High School, where they have multiple buildings and it's an open campus, that's a challenge, right? I mean, you've got kids coming in, so that could, and some of the complaints from the local school systems has been that's going to be very expensive to implement. The legislature's made that a law. If we'll see if Governor Kemp signs that into law, and there's some funding that goes along with that. There's only so much we can do to harden our schools without them becoming a prison. So I want to make sure that our kids are safe from external threats, but I also want to feel like they're not walking into a prison every day. I think one way to do that is to make sure that there is a dedicated school resource officer at every school. Every middle school, every elementary school, and every high school. And I think that based on the number of student population, for example, a high school, some high schools could have 3,000 students, which is maybe the size of Emerson. You're talking about a small town there, definitely a good sized neighborhood. So, and high schools are larger, so you probably need to have more than one student resource officer at that school. My friends over in Forsyth County have made this a priority, and they have two at every high school, at least two, and then one at every middle and elementary school. So school resource officer, so minimize the threat as much as you can that comes in from the school. Now let's talk about internal threats. And that is not, and I'm not thinking as much shooter and stuff like that. I'm thinking of the kids in the classroom. Discipline is an issue in our schools. It is. And right now, we're not doing a lot about it. We have something called CCRPI, which stands for College Career Readiness Performance Index. And it's one of the mandated federal accountability things that we have. We have to say that we have an accountability system. Well, part of that is school environment, which is safety, or not safety, but discipline. And the way the system is now is if you have, it sort of works like your credit. The more dings you have on it, the lower your score goes. And so the more office referrals you have with students that are misbehaving, the lower your score goes. And so what's happening, and I've seen this in school systems across this state, is that principals and school administrators are choosing not to address issues because it goes on the record.
And that would go with bullying.
And bullying is part of that. Mm-hmm. So here's my theory on that. This is my principle, and I've said this from day one. Teachers are there to teach, students are there to learn, and anything that gets in the way of that is wrong and will not be tolerated. So first off, we're going to change that accountability system where it disincentivizes school administrators to hold students accountable. Number two, we're going to hold students accountable for their actions. If you injure another student or a teacher in a malicious way, you're going to be removed from that school and that classroom. We're still going to provide you a free and appropriate public education, but you may have to have that online. We're going to protect our students and our teachers. But also, we cannot sacrifice the learning of 25 or 26, however many students are in that classroom, for the sake of one. So I often will say when I'm talking to groups of people, if little Johnny wants to continue to be a disruption, then little Johnny's got to be removed. And I'll double down on that point in saying, my wife's a teacher and has taught at all grade levels. And if a teacher says that a child needs to be removed from their classroom, then we need to listen. We need to listen.
Along with that of teachers and evaluating students, though, I was a substitute teacher for a while, and what I saw, I thought, I knew it happened when I was in school, but I was kind of shocked at how much it happened now of what I call pigeonholing students, where teachers will, at lunch, talk to each other about different students, and they would say, it came out, and they would say the particular student came from a certain part of town, low income, maybe their daddy's in jail or whatever, and they would say, he's a lost cause. They would just not even worry about teaching that child because they felt like they were a lost cause for whatever reason. And that really bothered me because
it's wrong.
Because every child has potential.
That's right.
So how would you eliminate that and have teachers really help all kids to become their best?
Well, that's heartbreaking, number one, and it's wrong and should not be tolerated. Our job as educators is to take a child, for us, number one, to see their potential. Number two, to help that child see their potential. And number three, give the child all the tools, resources, and skills necessary to reach that potential. That's the purpose of education, is to help a student go from where they are to where they can go, to give them the tools, resources necessary to do that. We've got to make sure that what you're describing doesn't happen. And most educators I know would not fall in that camp. And I will tell you, I can sort of think of maybe educators that might be that, but educators right now are stressed out. They are overworked. They're overloaded. They're underappreciated. And if they're having to deal with constant disruptions and discipline in their classrooms, I can see where they might just say, you know what, throw my hands up. But that bothers me greatly. That would be the attitude of our teachers, and that we would need to address that for sure.
And now you have a degree in administration. You've obviously worked with budgets and so forth. How would you use your experience in education to make sure on the administrative side of education that the money is spent properly, that things are being implemented, that we don't have wasteful programs that don't do the good that we expect them to do? How would you work all that into education?
Yeah, so the way that Georgia is set up is that the State Department of Education, so over 50% of Georgia's budget, so you're talking $16 billion, goes to education in K-12 in Georgia. And that money flows through the Department of Education to the local school districts. The local school districts then create a budget. We know what their hard costs are, facilities costs, what their faculty costs are, because there's a pay schedule, all of that sort of stuff. What gets school systems sometimes in trouble is their discretionary spending or deciding to build a new building or something like that. Every school system submits or is supposed to submit by law an audit annually to the Georgia Department of Education. And this is an audit that says that they are spending their money wisely. It highlights any concerns or red flags that should then be addressed by the Department of Education. That's currently not been happening. And a good case study of that is Dublin City Schools. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they are now $13 million in debt, and they've not turned in audits for the past 5 years, and they've not been held accountable. And so now we're at the point where, will that school system even be sustainable, or is it going to have to be the charter revoked and those schools be taken to be a part of the Lawrence County School District? And that's a question we don't know the answer to. I mean, it's still playing out every day before our eyes. You've got to have someone that will hold the schools accountable for following the rules and procedures and protocols that are set. We don't have that right now in leadership. I'm going to make sure that our schools are held accountable. But two, your school boards are for that. So there's something that a lot of folks will like to say, locals anyway, local control. So the state sets the standard of this is what you'll teach. These are the rules and policies and procedures that you should follow. These are best practices. Then the local school system, the school board, and the superintendent gets to then implement and interpret those policies and create companion policies for the local school system. So local school systems set their own budget. They take the funding, because remember, only 45% money comes from the state. The rest of it's federal, and then the rest of it's local. And so they set their own priorities in their spending. Clearly, if there is a situation where the student outcomes are not met, or if a school system continues to fail or is not meeting financial benchmarks, then that gives opportunity for the state school superintendent and the State Department of Education to come in and have a conversation and either provide corrective guidance, or in some cases, in the worst cases I would say, come in and take over the school system to make sure that it's righted. That's why it's so important that you have knowledgeable and good people elected to your local school board. That's your first line of defense as a local community, and that is so important. Whether you're talking about the curriculum that your students are being taught, or you're talking about how the budget is made. And here's the thing, and there's a lot of concern or question about what is the role of a school board member. Well, they really only by law have 3 roles: fire well, I guess let's hire and fire the superintendent, set policy, and set the budget. So truly, school board members can't get into the day-to-day management of a school or the school system even. They work through the superintendent to accomplish those things.
Now, they would go back a little bit because there's one final question. And when you address safety, you didn't really touch on this. I'm going to give you the opportunity to do it. We have seen in recent years a lot of teachers that have not had, shall we say, the moral character.
Yeah.
They've groomed students, have sex with students. Maybe they've gotten arrested for something else outside of the classroom, anywhere from DUI to domestic or whatever you want to call it. And parents are becoming concerned, I think, whether these people that are in charge of these students have the character required to be effective teachers and to be examples to these students instead of causing them to go in a wrong direction.
Correct.
So explain how you feel about that and how you would encourage, I would say, call it moral clauses, moral turpitude.
Moral turpitude clauses still in the contracts. Well, first off, you've got to have people that are of good character and of high moral rapport that are in our classrooms teaching our students. Our students are, and this is just the natural progression of adolescence, they are learning and testing and figuring out who they are. So you want to make sure that that's free from influences that are not good. Specific instance that you addressed or asked about was teachers being romantically, sexually involved with students. That is wrong. We will not tolerate it. Their license will be revoked. And as far as I'm concerned, we were mandated reporters in the state of Georgia. Those folks need to be fired, they need to be arrested, and they need to be prosecuted and never allowed to step foot in a classroom or a place influencing or working with children again. And I mean business about that. And we take those allegations seriously. They need to be investigated properly and fully. And while that's being investigated, that teacher needs to be on administrative leave because, sometimes folks just say something. And so you want to make sure before you ruin somebody's life that there is cause. But we take that seriously and we remove the threat. In terms of teachers coming in, one of the concerns, and rightfully so, is that folks are coming in with ideologies that are not aligned to traditional ideologies or sometimes anti-American, sometimes say woke ideologies. Here's the thing. We have standards in the State Department of Education that tell what a student should learn in every grade. They should learn this in math. They should learn this in science. They should learn this in social studies. At no point in time should a student know what a teacher's political ideology is, whether they're Republican, whether they're Democrat, whether they're Libertarian, whether they're confused. A student should not know that because their opinion does not impact the teaching. And teachers should be trained on how to, and they are, but they should be reminded that there's a way to teach something objectively without inserting your opinion into it. The vast majority of our teachers do a good job with that, but there are some folks that perhaps are not doing like they should and perhaps teaching some things that I wouldn't want my children learning. And those teachers have to be held accountable. At the end of the day, the standards are clear. You need to teach the standards and not deviate from those.
And thank you very much.
Absolutely.